So we're up for a panel discussion now. I'd ask the panelists to come up as I call their names. Karys Rhea is an American political commentator and former producer at the Epoch Times and Newsmax. She's a rising leader at the Global Liberty Institute, and she's currently working on a book about right-wing identity politics. Please, Karys, join us on stage. It is my pleasure to call on Seth Dillon. I gather people here know what the Babylon Bee is, and if not, you will soon learn. Seth, please join us. Pastor Dumisani Washington is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, an institute dedicated to strengthening the relationship between Israel, the Jewish people, and people of African descent through education and advocacy, and also a professional musician. And James Lindsay is a leading cultural critic and intellectual who, along with Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, perpetrated some of the most vicious hoaxes on faux academic postmodern journals. We'll hear about that too. I mentioned Hitler. I'll mention their Mein Kampf essay for a feminist journal, which was accepted. Imagine that. His analysis of woke pseudo-academic theories was published in Hebrew, and it was a pleasure to host him here in Tel Aviv not long ago. We shall hear those distinguished guests on the topic of right-wing anti-Semitism. So, a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Dumisani, I'd like to start with you because one of the most worrying things is what is happening with the rift within the Christian community in the United States. And we've all seen Tucker Carlson's vicious attacks on evangelicals and other Christians. How and why did this emerge, in your opinion?
Well, in terms of why it happened with Tucker, he can only answer that. The timing of it, though, is what I can barely speak to. Tucker, for whatever his reasons are, with his anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and his attacks, particularly on Christian Zionists, he said that he hates people like myself and Johnny Moore. He hates Christian Zionists. Why he's doing it, he'd have to talk to Jesus about that. But what's happening, however, though, is that it is resonating with those, as Reverend Johnny Moore just said, those who are insecure, those who are looking for a reason that something is the problem, and he's tapping into that. And I'll just say this as an opening. We have said in our organization, he is probably the most dangerous anti-Semite in the United States, taking that title away from Louis Farrakhan. He is the white conservative Louis Farrakhan. If you look at their bullet points where Israel and Jews are concerned, they're identical. He's just appealing to the other side of the aisle. So that's part of what's going on with Tucker and why it's gaining traction with some.
James, we've had a previous discussion, and you have an analytical perspective on why. Why has this emerged under the large interfaith umbrella of MAGA? Suddenly, these forces who are undermining American conservatism. Why?
So before I address why specifically, I want to put a frame around what this is. Some of you will know that I have this term that I've made popular, the woke right, and I've given an analysis of this concept of woke for a decade or so. And it's a complicated philosophical topic. I tend to be a little heavy, but I think we can boil this down. What this comes to, what is woke in a practical sense, is this politic of friend and enemy, as it could be called, a friend and enemy distinction of politics, where there is a group of people who are designated as friend because they feel similarly alienated and oppressed, and they develop a grievance and an envy-based view of friends and enemies. Of course, I don't have to tell an audience in Israel at an anti-Semitism conference that sometimes there are enemies. You're all very aware that there are enemies. But there's a difference. When you believe that your enemy is your enemy because you are envious of him, because you have grievances against him, that's a different mindset. And so this politics of friend and enemy appears in the woke on the left, whether it was BLM with Black Lives Matter. If you didn't agree with them, you were a racist. So the enemies were called racists and the friends were called anti-racists. In the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong, Mao called them very bluntly the people and the enemies of the people. And if you were the enemies of the people, you would have the people mobilized against you, or they too would become the enemies of the people. So you have this logic of hatred and destruction. The Nazis, of course, used this same idea. The fascists use the same idea. You're either with us or against us. That's what fascism means. And of course, in radical Islam, there is a concept in Arabic, the al-bara, which is loyalty and disavowal, that metastasizes through the Muslim Brotherhood and that Bolshevik ideology of Islamism. And this idea is that the friends are the people who are united in their alienation and in their grievance against this politics, against this society that they believe cheats them, oppresses them, robs them of their opportunity. And the enemy has to be destroyed so that the friends might be able to survive. So why has this happened? The reason that this has happened is because we've been operating under this logic, thanks to the left, the woke left, then the Marxist left, for many years. We've operated under this logic, and it's contagious. We've started to adopt it ourselves. The reaction to a friend-enemy distinction, a war between tribes, red and blue, A and B, left and right, is more tribalism. We've adopted it for this reason, and what has happened is President Trump threw a monkey wrench in the entire operation. President Trump came up with MAGA, Make America Great Again, which is spread around the world as a concept that we're going to do things differently than this left-right paradigm, that we're going to step out of having the friend-enemy distinction imposed upon us by the left, and elements around the world that do not want that movement to be able to succeed have said the MAGA movement must be destroyed. And this is why. The MAGA movement, which represents people seeking truth, that represents people seeking freedom, liberty, even God, has to be destroyed, because if it's successful, the friend-enemy politics that they use to leverage from left or from right one time after another to get their opportunities will go away. So they've seeded the American right with the most divisive issue that you could possibly have, which is anti-Semitism. As Reverend Moore just said, evangelicals will not go with them, and they know this. So they can split the right into those that will and that those will not. So you have the one team and the other, and they fight no longer working together. And they can undermine President Trump's vision. They can undermine the resurgence of a true freedom-oriented politic, and they can advance their agenda back on the friend-enemy distinction. And I'll just add one last point. This distinction, if we look at loyalty and disavowal as the phrasing, friend-enemy, it doesn't matter. That was the Nazi phrasing from Carl Schmitt. Always ends up including anti-Semitism, not just because it's a useful tool to split coalitions, but because the loyalty of the Jewish people is to their God, to their memory, their community. So they will not be loyal to a regime. So when the regime declares the enemy, the Jew will say no, along with the evangelical beside him, for the same reasons. They will say no. So they become enemy by default and must be destroyed. Destroying them from a position of weakness is impossible, so they must first be dehumanized, demonized, and that's anti-Semitism. So it is the first step in a broader project of imperialism to take over those who will not submit their freedoms.
Seth, I mentioned the article you guys, Lindsay, I mentioned the article that you guys submitted to a feminist journal in which you took a chapter of Mein Kampf and you replaced Jews with men and Germans with women, and it was accepted. So obviously the erosion of standards opens the door. And for years, we've been writing, and we thought that anti-Semitism is now more prominent on the left because it's mainstream there. And we thought these were only lone wolves on the right. And we had an explanation why post-colonialism was hostile to Zionism and all the rest of it, and we know the communist roots of that ideology. And suddenly we see it rise on the right, and I'm telling you, for Jews and for Israelis, this is a shock. We thought these people were our allies. We thought that the ideology which sees a world based on nation states is the ideology of the conservative right, and suddenly we see this among people who we believed to be our friends. Seth, you've been making jokes, mockery of wokeism on the left. Is this wokeism on the right? Is this a parallel phenomena or a different breed?
Well, first let me just say this is my first time in Israel, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm honored to be here. I've had a very warm welcome, although I haven't received the check yet that I was expecting for all those posts. What is it, 7,000 a post? Is that
We
what I'm
Jews
supposed to
are
get?
very scrupulous about this, so
Maybe
don't worry.
I leave tonight, so we'll have to wrap that up soon. So for those who aren't familiar, yeah, I run the Babylon Bee, the world's most trusted, factually accurate news source. We publish funny fake news like The Onion or CNN. You know.
I should have I should have said this in your introduction.
Yeah.
The right has now carried the torch of humor.
Yeah.
Took it from the left. The Onion, which I used to admire, is no longer funny. You guys are on our following lists.
Yeah,
So,
well, yeah, we get more traction, more engagement, more traffic than they do now, so we've surpassed them. We're the biggest satire site in the world, which is pretty cool. But to answer your question about whether there's this wokeness on the, yeah, it's a mirror image of what was happening on the left, for sure. I think it's the same oppressed-oppressor dynamic. It's rooted in those grievances. It's seeking to scapegoat someone for, you know, your grievances, and targets the Jewish people. It does often go under those euphemisms of elites or globalists or whatever, but it's often explicitly the Jews. It is a problem on the right. I've been criticized so heavily. I'm so thankful for people like James, by the way, everyone on this stage, several of the people that are here in the audience tonight who are courageous enough to speak out about this, because when you do get that pushback. You get a lot of people who are telling you, especially in conservative circles where I live and work and play, you're not supposed to challenge anyone to the right of you. You're not supposed to challenge anyone on your side.
No enemies on the right.
No enemies to the right, because we can't defeat the left if we aren't unified and fighting against the left. And I think this is the most insane idea. It's a suicidal idea, honestly, because you know if you have cancer, for example, right? I did a full body scan recently, like one of these diagnostic scans, and I was very glad they didn't just check the left side of my body for cancer. They checked my whole body. And we have to be willing to do that. You know, the Babylon Bee, of course, makes fun of the left. We made fun of wokeness for many years. But when we see, you know, these evil ideologies arising on the right, not just going unchecked, but there's pressure on you not to challenge them. Yes, we have a moral responsibility to mock that too. And so one of the ways that we confront these things is refutation, obviously. You know, as C.S. Lewis, who said that good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered. I think satire is necessary for the same reason. Satire ridicules bad ideas, and so that's what we do to try to challenge them.
Well, Seth, you are... One could make an argument that you are responsible for the election of Donald Trump. And here's how it goes. It's because of the Babylon Bee that was shut down by Jack Dorsey and banished from Twitter that Elon Musk decided to buy Twitter. How did that come along? And are you happy with the results?
Well, I actually bear some responsibility for the spread of anti-Semitism on Twitter, because now we have more free speech there, so apologies for that. But the answer to that isn't censorship. The answer to that is fighting back in the public discourse, in the public square, confront bad ideas with the truth, with good ideas. The good ideas will prevail. We do need that free discourse and not to just, you know, suppress and silence other voices. So I'm in favor of what Elon did. But what happened there was, you know, we got suspended for doing a joke that we weren't supposed to tell. It was considered hateful conduct, and we got locked out of our account. And Elon was really upset about that because he had followed us. And he reached out to us and said, I can't believe you guys are suspended. You know, this humor should be allowed. We should be allowed to make jokes, especially when these are terrible ideas that have to be challenged. We have to be able to speak and confront them. You know, maybe I just need to buy Twitter and take care of this problem. And so 8 months later, he walks into Twitter carrying a sink saying, let that sink in, and unlock the Babylon Bee. So, you know, he's restored free speech because he saw voices like ours being suppressed. So we're grateful to him.
And one might say he strategically bought Twitter and helped Donald Trump win the election. So I'm going to offer you guys a more political explanation for the rise of anti-Semitism, assuming that some people use it with no connection to the question if they believe it or not. Because one of the horrifying things is that it became useful. It became a useful tool. So there is a fight. Once we thought that MAGA and America First were one and the same. Now the American firsters in MAGA have a new interpretation saying, no, Donald Trump is also the stooge of Zionism. He's not the isolationist we thought he would be. And if you want to be an isolationist, what you do is you first target Israel, America's closest ally, and say Israel is dragging you into wars. So, Karys, you're studying the rise of identity politics on the right. Is it a belief or just a tool?
Yeah, the question of what is motivating this, I think, is very complex because all of the possible motivations are at work here. You do have the grifters that are just going along for the clicks and the trends. You do have the true ideological believers. You do have the people that are paid by foreign actors. And it's really difficult to tell who's who. I would like to say, and also, you know, it's really a pleasure to be on the stage with you, Gadi, for the second time, and I also love being the only Jewish woman in a sea of handsome Christian men. And, you know, I think that since we all identify as conservative here, we can all agree, speaking to a room full of Israelis or moderate and conservative Jews, that we are way behind on this fight. I think that Jews especially believe that we can fight this using the language and the tactics that we are using to fight it on the left. But when you are speaking to a group of MAGA or America First conservatives, since apparently that's two different things now, we do not want to be using terms like hate speech or platforming. We do not want to be advocating for censorship, as Seth said, or content moderation. And I mean, Minister Chikli, you know, I love you from the bottom of my heart, but if you are talking to a group of America First conservatives, do not bring up Germany as an example with their banning of Holocaust denial and arresting people for hate speech. If we want to address anti-Semitic tropes and we're talking to populist right-wingers, we need to get people to understand that Israel is having more babies than any other developed country in the world, that Israel still has strong national pride, that masculinity and the warrior mentality is still valued. I mean, do you really think conservatives care that Israel has the biggest gay pride parade in the Middle East? You know, so I think that we really have our work cut out for us. We need to be doing twice as much work now instead of just fighting back against the claims of apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide. We also need to read up about what happened in the USS Liberty, and we need to understand really what the Talmud teaches and how it's not actually hateful towards Christians. We need to be able to react to claims that, like you said, Israel is dragging us into wars, or Winston Churchill is the greatest villain in World War II. So we really need to start understanding that this fever, as Johnny Moore so aptly called it, spreads like wildfire, and we can't confront it in the same way that we have been used to doing when we confront it on the left.
Let me just explain what the reference to Churchill was, because this is a guy named Daryl Cooper. I think he calls himself Martyr Made on Twitter, and it's actually very illuminating. Tucker Carlson brought him on to say it's not the first time that the Jews are dragging America into wars. They also, the financiers around Churchill, they also dragged America into a war, which was a war for the Jews, and it's not clear who the villain of that war was and on which side. And this is a useful example because look, attacking the Jews and Israel ends up attacking the defenders of Western civilization. Is that an argument that would be effective in the wild space of totally free speech, say on Rumble or on X? Dumisani, your take on that?
Would it be effective for some? It depends on who the audience is, right? If you're talking about the foundations of Western civilization, if you're talking about founding documents, founding fathers, that type of thing, even the relationship with the founding fathers with the Jewish community, yeah. For those who don't know any of those things, and this is part of the vacuum that is Western culture, particularly America right now, and it shouldn't be funny, there's just not a lot of education. The anti-Semitism is raising in the church because people don't know the Bible, and anti-Westernism is rising because people don't know the foundations of the nation, the type of thing. So, yes, to Karys's point, there has to be a multi-level conversation, right? Because I think you were saying earlier, the type of anti-Semitism that's happening on the right, it's happening in intellectual circles, it's happening on social media, it's happening everywhere. So one of the things that we were saying is that often Tucker Carlson becomes the lightning rod or the iconic figure, and for good reason, right? But the Marjorie Taylor Greens who wanted to outlaw people who are actually lobbying Congress for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, right? And the Steve Bannons and then Jack Posobiec said long after Tucker had kind of busted that matrix open, you had conversations being had that were not being touched on at all. And part of the reason was because of fear. We said this before as well. This is what paralleled 10 years ago on the left, when it was Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and they were saying all these anti-Israel things. The issue wasn't just them. It was that the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers said nothing. Yeah. Fast forward to now, this is exactly what's happening now. Prominent figures on the right say nothing because they're afraid of Tucker. They're afraid of, and let me go ahead and step into this, TPUSA that still platforms Tucker, if I can use that word, and says nothing about the anti-Semitic, anti-Christian stuff that he's saying. This is the same danger.
We're running out of time, but a very brief follow-up question, Dumisani, because, you know, the civil rights movement was originally in an alliance with Jews. And then came the Black Power rights and the beginning of Zionism as colonialism with the rise of Malcolm X. And this ended up with Obama. Obama is a descendant of that view. How are you doing in the black community with your message?
What people often are surprised to know is that the majority, there's no poll that you can point to that the majority of the black community is either anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. There are higher levels of it than maybe some of the other ethnic groups, but it's not a majority, never has been. However, there's been KGB-level disinformation focused at the black community since the 1960s, so you would think it would be much higher than it is. So yes, to your point really quickly, yes, there's been a black-Jewish synergy that goes back to the turn of the century because the NAACP, which is the oldest civil rights organization in the world, was created by black and Jewish Americans, long before you even get to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So that has always been the case. And oh, by the way, someone like the former mayor of Bloomberg just donates another tens of millions of dollars to HBCU medical schools because of the same mindset. That synergy continues on in the black community. We're celebrating him for that and everything. So it is not gaining traction in the black community. And I'll say this is the last part of it. What's happening on the right is not affecting the black community. It's affecting white conservative Christians, and this is part of what the whole issue is. And what's the message? The same free Palestine message that was infiltrated our community in the 60s is now white kids saying the same thing.
Astonishing. We're running out of time, so final comments, and you can react to anything that anyone said.
I want to say something about this issue of courage, because this is really where we have a shortage, right? I think there's a lot more moral clarity on this issue than there is courage. People are terrified of someone like, challenging Tucker Carlson, if you're in our world, means that he's going to start trashing you and attacking you personally. And he's got a lot of power and influence all the way up into the administration, the highest levels. And so when you're on the wrong side of someone like that, even if you're standing for something right, there's a consequence to that. It's terrifying to be willing to take that risk. I'm really appreciative of anybody who's willing to challenge these things in the face of that risk. And instead of platforming these voices and promoting them the way that Tucker is willing to challenge them. We have Dinesh D'Souza in the room tonight, today. He's confronting these things head on.
He will be speaking here in the afternoon.
There are voices like this who are out there. We need to support them, and their courage is contagious. It will spread to others. And so the more that we speak up, the more others will follow in our steps.
And that is a personal testimony. You have been targeted by some of these people with death threats.
Many.
And others. Yeah, so the problem is not the Tucker Carlsons, it's also the Megyn Kellys.
Can I say something about that?
What?
I think that, especially here in Israel, people think that this is an issue that is kind of relegated to the realm of the groypers, and they really just know the names Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens. But as people have been alluding to here, there are a lot of figures that they themselves are not necessarily anti-Semitic, but they're putting forth ideas in the right that serve as sort of a gateway drug into this conspiratorialism and also what I would call these post-constitutional ideas for America, which mirror the left in that they are neo-revolutionary and reactionary. And so I think we need to start being sensitive to other players in this. We need to really understand the doctrine of post-liberalism and what that means and how it can be used for good, but how it also can it's a very slippery slope and it can be used for evil. We need to understand the landscape of this. It's not just the Groypers. We need to understand the paleo-conservatives and the libertarians and how Russia infiltrated these spaces after the Cold War and turned them very anti-Semitic. We need to understand the Christian ethno-nationalism that is brewing across the states and why that is happening. So there's a lot of elements to this, and
we need a 3-hour-long panel.
Yeah, and I mean, we need a whole day panel for this. Maybe one day there'll be a conference just about this. But it's important that we all have our antennas up to more than just the Tuckers and the Candaces.
Well, if Donald Trump is a great friend of Israel. To be honest, we're waiting to hear from him something clear about Tucker Carlson. It's time he says something. Yeah, James, please.
So just, again, on this word of courage and this idea of that being the bigger lack that Seth points out, and all the things that Karys just brought up, I'll just say that the Israel itself and the Jewish people have something to offer here that's very unique, that's very easy to step into because you live it every day, especially here in the state of Israel after October 7th. It's that courage is proof of faith, and this renewal of faith and this renewal of courage comes very naturally here. So it's a very easy example to set and to talk about and to show why things are worth standing for. Here the threat is imminent, the threat is physical, it is dangerous. In the US, it's insidious. But that courage shows that you care about something bigger than yourself, longer than yourself, timeless, more important than yourself. And that courage, like I said, is a proof of faith. And this is an opportunity that the Jewish people can lead in exactly the same way that they've led for, 3,000 years or something, by being who they are and showing the world what it means to live your faith and exhibit that it shows courage to do so.
Thank you very much. And if I may end with the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Congress and elsewhere in the UN, we have to remain focused on the fact that this war, our war, is your war, he said to the United States and to Europe and to the Judeo-Christian civilization at large, because this is not a clash of civilizations. It is a clash between civilization and barbarism. Thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, James, Lindsay, Pastor Dumisani, Washington, Karys Rhea, and Seth Dillon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gadi Taub, and distinguished speakers, Reverend Johnny Moore, President of the Congress of Christian Leaders, Mr. Seth Dillon, CEO of Babylon Bee, Dr. James Lindsay, founder of New Discourse, Ms. Kara Reha, political commentator, fellow Middle East Forum, and Mr. Dumisani, Washington, founder and CEO of Institute of Black Solidarity with Israel.